I think so. So this is very informal tonight. Just wanted to host a town hall and chat with folks. And I have to say, I'm really, really impressed that this many of you showed up. And I'm competing with one of the most gorgeous spring days we've had. So thank you so much. So I'm Sherrie Sprenger, your state representative for this area. And tonight's a pretty informal conversation. I'm going to give you a legislative update. But I don't assume I know what you want to talk about, so I want to talk about some of the things you want to talk about. And then we'll do some questions and whatever. So I always start my town halls at 8, so gives people a chance to take off if they want, because I don't want to keep people past their bedtime. But I'm not going to jet out of the room. So if there's things we want to talk about, we will. This is Rebecca in the back, my legislative assistant, and so when you call the office, or you, well, email too, but if you call the office or stop in, that's usually the person you're going to get. And I know she treats you right, and will help you get answers to whatever. So, is anybody opposed to introductions? Good. Tass, tell us who you are. It's just nice to know for everybody.
I'm Tass Morrison. I live in Sublimity.
Okay.
Laura Kinder-Myson here in Station.
Lee?
Lee Hazelwood, and I'll defend you, Representative.
Thank you, sir.
Our legislature doesn't always get started on time.
No, it rarely starts on time.
Francis Riser, sub.
Jeannie Reiser, Sublimity.
Jackie Sparks, my husband and I live in Staten.
I'm competing against Jeopardy, too, I find out.
I'm Christine Bartel, and I live in Staten.
I'm Rob Bartel, and I live with Christine. We really don't live in Staten because we live on the other side of the river in Lynn County, but that's our mailing address.
So, you're back
On
out.
Staten Saddle Road.
Yeah, okay.
Vance Day, Salem.
What do you do, Vance?
I'm a circuit court judge here in Marion County.
I'm Lindsay Partridge from Salem. I'm also a circuit court judge in Marion County.
He's a better judge than I am.
Oh.
We'll be the judge of that.
Oh, this is fun there on the hot seat.
I might be a better judge of character, but I don't know if I'm a better judge.
And you, sir?
I'm Lauren Kuipers. I run the repair business on the end of the town in Lynn County also. Crossroads Equipment Repairs, just across the bridge, on the other side of the bridge there.
Heavy equipment?
Heavy and farm equipment, yes.
Okay.
I'm from Sile. Actually, I'm from Sile, born and raised in Sile. Just built the business there.
Joe?
I'm Wayne Stedronsky from Sublimity.
Tom Boxer, rural state.
Did you say rural Staten?
Rural.
I love that. I love that.
David Nielsen from Staten.
Well, great. Well, so what I want to hear from you right now is just what are some of the topics. We'll get into the questions and that kind of thing later, but I think I know what you want to hear about, at least in part. So tell me a couple of things you want to make sure you hear about.
PERS reform.
First, then that's on my list.
I want to know if you people up in Staten or up in Salem know the difference between legal and illegal.
Well, I can't speak for all the people up there, but I can sure speak for me, so I'll answer that one. Anything else?
I would like to talk about the Oregon School for the Deaf.
Okay, that's good. Anything else? Yes, sir.
I would like to know what they're talking about on our guns.
Okay, that was one on my list. Hi, come on in. We're just getting going.
Good.
So, this one should be fairly quick. So I'll start here. So on guns. A lot of conversation about gun bills in the legislature this time. And there's been assault weapon bans, magazine capacity bans, background checks, some curtailing of sales, some curtailing of CHL, concealed handgun license holders, and the rights that they have and the ability where and when they can carry their guns. At this point, and don't anybody chalk this up to a win or lose column, depending on where you're at on the issue. At this point, the bills do not look very viable in the building. And to let you know, most people know where I'm at. In fact, I was asked this question for the first time in probably a year or two last week. They said, where do you stand on gun issues? I'm very Second Amendment, pro Second Amendment. I think the shootings that have occurred are awful. They're terrible. They cannot be ignored. We need to look at a remedy. One of the things that you find as a common denominator in all of those is, okay, yes, guns, but they're guns. The other thing that you find is there are some mental illness issues. That's not bad. That means we as a society need to be more vigilant in bringing the supports that people need in that area. So I've not supported those gun bills. I didn't sign on to any of those gun bills. At this point, they all look like they're on life support. There doesn't seem to be the votes on the Senate side. They haven't even been to the House. The chair of Judiciary is not very friendly to gun bills. And he drew a line in the sand before session started because it was right after Sandy Hook. And they said, he said, you've got to start them on the Senate. They didn't start on the House side. And at this point, they've not moved through. There's deadlines that haven't been met. But well, hear me say this. I was talking to a legislator. I remember who it was. A retired legislator, somebody that used to do it. He saw a bill one time that started, you'll love this, Vance, started, the idea, the conversation started 36 hours before what ended up being the end of session for the entire legislative session. An idea to a law took 36 hours. A little scary if you ask me. It is legal, but it's a little scary. So I never consider anything done until session is over. So does that answer your question on gun bills?
Well, why don't we enforce our laws we have?
Such as?
Such as criminals buying guns. They're not prosecuting them.
Okay. Well, and I don't know exactly what you're talking about. There are incidents that you're talking about, or I would try to address them.
Mainly not Oregon. I'm talking about
Well,
Chicago and areas like that.
I don't know what to tell you other than, and I agree with that, sometimes that seems very frustrating. One of the elements that needs to be before the choice to prosecute comes about is that there's enough evidence to likely win, and that's sometimes a tough thing. And I'm not defending any cases because I don't even know what you're talking about. The reality is laws were violated in all the shootings. So I don't see another law being the solution. I really don't. So did I get there for you? Okay.
Sherrie,
And yes.
I have a question, something that probably not hardly anybody knows about, but about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, my next door neighbor, right there in downtown Scioto, nice guy, been over my house. We'd had, afternoon coffee, that sort of stuff. All of a sudden one night he snapped. And we had 11 police cars, 5 EMT vehicles in my backyard at 4 o'clock in the morning because he was beating up his wife. Now what happened was, I got the full story, was he is bipolar. He had gone into a mental place and said, hey, I can feel myself going over the edge. And what did they do? They gave him some paperwork. 3 days later, he tried to do what he did in Scioto, which was kill his wife and his family and everyone else. He's currently under mental observation and so on and so forth. So it damaged that family. So here's a man that I knew. I had not a clue. No one did that was what the case. But he knew himself, and he went to someone and said, help me. And they did.
Because he knew.
Because he knew. Now, how is that any different than some of these other people that we were just talking about, the Sandy Hook and some of these others, that we've known they had mental cases, but no one has done anything for them?
One of the things, and I almost hesitate to go here because it's a bit of a Pandora's box,
Well, I agree with
but
that.
it's reality. This isn't about pointing the finger because we're society in this room. We're society in this room. So this isn't about saying somebody else, judges or whoever's doing a bad job. We have not yet gotten to a place where we do a very good job with mental illness in this society. We just don't. You can say more money would solve it, more money would help, but I think that our understanding of mental illness is so I don't know what to say. There just seems to be a lack of understanding and a lack of resources and a lack of systems, and I'm not about more government by any means, but there's just this lack of infrastructure to help people when they cry out, because that's behavior that should have been rewarded by providing the help that is needed. And when we have talked about the shootings, and I've had more than one person come up to me and say, well, don't you care about the shootings? Or somebody said, you're not even moved by the shootings. I don't think taking my neighbors or residents in the state of Oregon their guns or doing certain things with their guns is going to help anything that's happened at Sandy Hook or anywhere else. I just don't. I think there's lots of issues there. And we can spend probably the next 2 hours there. And I don't have a simple answer for you. I really don't. There has been a shift this session in the legislature for conversations to be more about that. It really has. In fact, I signed on to a bill that I normally wouldn't have. Probably 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, I wouldn't have. I said, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to say no to the gun control issues out there, or a lot of the gun control measures. I need to have some conversation, and I think that's the right conversation to have. I really do. I saw a hand pop up.
Well, it becomes a privacy issue for the individual. Because I had first-hand experience that in my family, my brother.
With mental illness.
Yes, and my mother was always told he needs to hurt himself or someone else before they would do anything.
That's true.
So that's a stalemate right there.
That a lot of times that is true. So I'll tell a very brief story. I say in my prior life I was a deputy sheriff, and I worked the road, and I arrested people, and I wrote tickets, and all sorts of stuff. And I arrested a guy one night that was about twice my size, and I pulled him over in a small town because his taillights were out. And the car stop was going to be, most people don't know their taillights are out, okay? We know our headlights are out most of the time. We don't know about our taillights. I was going to pull him over and just say, hey, your taillights are out. It was dark. Make sure you fix them. And I get up there, and clearly something was amiss. And so the guy would not cooperate with me, although he would not fight me. And I said, would you please step out of the car? And it's driver's license and registration. We started that bit, and it just went south, and he started to leave. He didn't run, he walked away. And he didn't try to hurt me, and he walked away, and I kind of chased him walking, and I said, stop, and I ended up with backup, and long story short, took 3 of us to wrestle him into 2 pairs of handcuffs because we couldn't get his arms together behind his back, and I took him up to the state hospital. He ended up with Capstone, which was like our mace spray, and it was very difficult to get him in the back seat of a car, and the only reason we could get him in the back seat of my car was I was a canine handler. I didn't have a back seat in my car. My dog was off on light duty, who had surgery, and had a plywood back there. And take him up to the state hospital, and I leave him. He comes back a couple days later. This was a nice, normal-looking guy in a decent vehicle that just didn't have taillights. A couple, 3 days later, he showed up at the local police department to pick up his watch because that got broken or taken off or whatever, fell off. And he showed up, and life was great. And they said, why did you do that? I mean, he was just as great to talk to as you could hope. And the cop that was there said, why'd you do that? Why did you make this something that it wasn't? He said, I knew I was struggling. I knew I'd been spiraling down. I didn't want to hurt her, so I left. I found his parents down in Alsea, and I went down there, very simple people. And I said, do you realize how close your son got to being shot? Poor mom and dad were stressed, they were upset, they were crying, mom was, and she says, I know. I said, you got to do something. She says, we don't have enough to come alongside him. That's a sad story. That should not happen. I won't tell you how that story ended. But that was a guy that knew there was an issue. He didn't want to hurt me. I'm very thankful of that. But that was just, there wasn't a system in place, and that was early to mid-90s, somewhere in there. And we haven't got much better. We haven't got much better. So let's talk about PERS. PERS reform. That's a big topic, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll start the PERS conversation with, I'm not in PERS. I'm not in PERS, so I don't have that inherent conflict there. So we passed out Senate Bill 822, which was a PERS reform, and many people are referring to that as PERS Light and Easy PERS, and all sorts of things. I have some concerns about that bill, and I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you what I believe is occurring, what needs to occur with PERS, and then some of you might agree with me, and I'm sure some of you will disagree with me, and that's okay. So we passed that bill out. I voted no out of the House. It's over in the Senate right now, and I believe it's going to pass. One of the things this bill did that is very problematic to me is it's something called collaring. And the best way to explain it is when we get, and this analogy has been used a lot, but that's because it's a good analogy. It's just like getting the notice in the mail in November from a bank that says you can skip December's payment and tack it on to the end, because we need, theoretically, we need money in the budget now, not after Christmas. And so this pushes out some of those payments that will incur some interest. I don't think that's smart. I just don't think that's smart, and it's pushing the issue down the road a little bit farther. I signed on to a PERS bill that had many options in it. Actually, Chief co-sponsored a PERS bill that had many options in it. One of those options was, or is, that years ago PERS was set up that the 9% Oregon tax rate was waived, but if you moved out of state, or Oregon taxes, if you moved out of state, you would think you'd pay that, right? No, it stands if you move out of state. So that to me just doesn't make sense. The other thing that could be done is spiking. Do we know what spiking is? My brother did it right before he retired. I don't blame him. He wasn't a state employee. He was private. Your PERS, your payout in part is based on your last 5 years of wages. So you build that up. So people will, if they're in a position, can. And you know what? Who would not do that? How many of you would say, you know what, I have this opportunity to work a few more hours here and get a better retirement? Who's going to say no? Nobody's going to say no. And I don't think you're evil if you do that. I don't think that's what the system's intended to do, though. So they spike their income, boosts up their PERS rate. I just don't see that as being appropriate. PERS system years ago when it was set up to cover 65 to 70% of your wage that you had while you were working. That included Social Security. We're beyond that now. There are people that make more on their PERS retirement than they did working. So, and there's a bunch of things that you can do with PERS. That's one of them.
How many people, though?
Yeah.
How many what?
How many people are actually earning more now than they did when they were working?
I don't know, but you know what? We might be able to get that information, exactly how many. But I know there's some. I've talked to them.
Well, it's been in the paper, too.
Yeah, it's not everybody by any means.
I think it's a minority.
It is, but taxpayers are paying for that.
Oh, sure.
Taxpayers are paying. The other thing that occurred, and there's been a lot of conversation, this came up at the town hall the other night. Mike Bellotti from the University of Oregon, everybody said, how could, yeah, Vance is laughing, how could his PERS check be so big? Well, and it's legal, so that's what you're getting at. It's legal. We don't like it. So he had his salary from the university, which was very nice, and that's fine. And then a lot of philanthropic interests contributed more to boost that up. And so his PERS rate was based on what got boosted up. I don't think that's so good. Now, if Mike Bellotti was not in the system, would we still have a PERS issue? Absolutely. So it's not about one person, it's not about 5 people. The other thing that I encourage you to think about with PERS is there's a lot of conversation about it's good or it's bad or we should or we shouldn't. I think retirement is fine. My husband and I have been working on retirement for a long time and stressed when we get our statements, and each year we have a birthday, we stress a little more when we get the statements because it's getting a little closer. But we've contributed our money into our retirement. And regardless of what you think of PERS, let's try to remove that element from the conversation. PERS is good, PERS is bad. Let's remove that piece and say we have a program in the state of Oregon that has obligations. And our prior governor, a Democrat, who typically is more aligned with unions and typically more supportive of PERS, said, we cannot afford this. Our current governor, a Democrat who is typically more supportive of PERS, came out with some of his own ideas on how to cut PERS. And he says, we cannot continue to pay for it. So whether we like the system or not, I do not believe we can sustain the system. Are we paying the bills? Yes. It's like when you buy a car that has a higher payment than what you can afford. You're still making the car payment, and the car payment's not getting repossessed, but you're struggling in all other areas of your budget. And that's what we're doing. Tass is asking about that because she sits on the school board. And it's just growing astronomically. I don't want to find the state of Oregon in a position where, oh my gosh, we're almost bankrupt, or we're struggling, we've got to do something. California handed out IOUs. I would hate to hand out an IOU as a PERS check for the month of June. And I'm not saying that's happening, that's not a fear tactic, that's just a reality. If you have a program, you've got to make some adjustments that you can afford and that you can handle. And I think we can do that in smaller incremental ways, opposed to wiping out the program or not being able to meet the obligations. So that's PERS. Any questions or thoughts on that before we move on to the next thing?
What do you think the likelihood is of further bills before the end of the session?
Great question. So Tass has been following. So a PERS bill moved, and if you've been watching the news, you've heard the Speaker of the House say, there will be no more PERS reform. This is it. And there were other PERS bills, none of which received hearings. Bills need to receive hearings to move through the process. I don't know. There's a gridlock right now. I'll be honest with you. There's a gridlock. And whether or not we need to raise taxes or not, I always go back to, people have asked me, well, gosh, you'd never like to raise taxes. Don't you like taxes? I don't mind taxes. We need taxes. Nice library, isn't it? Taxes. We need taxes to do certain things. We sure like driving across the bridge at the end of town and it holding up. Those are tax dollars. I like getting a cop or a firefighter when I dial 911. But to have a conversation of how do we get more money without talking about how we can better spend or not spend the money we have and control the costs just doesn't make sense. How many of us in our household budgets say, this is what we want, got to get more money? No, in our house at least, we say, this is what we can afford because this is how much money we have. So that's where I get stuck in that tax conversation. It's an endless fight if you just want to raise and raise and raise and raise.
Would we have this issue with PERS or taxes if we had better economy with jobs, revenue coming in?
Good point, jobs. It would be part of it. I sat on a school board up until 2008, and a few years before that, somewhere in that time, the economy was good. We weren't in a recession, and we were still struggling. And I built 5 school board budgets, and the first thing that was thrown out in every single one of those conversations, and this does not mean it's a bad thing, it means it's that big of a thing. The first thing that was thrown out every time we sat around the table to work out our budget was, what are the PERS increases? Not what are the PERS costs, what are the PERS increases? Because they go up. What's your PERS increase this year? Do you know, Tass?
Gosh, I should know.
Sorry, I put her on the spot. That's not fair.
That's okay.
But they're going up every single year, in part because several years ago, it was agreed upon that the PERS return would be guaranteed at 8%, regardless. Who here would have loved 8% the last 2-3 years? It would have made me happy. So the economy is an important piece, huge piece, huge piece. But we've had good times in our economy and we still have that conversation. Does that make sense? We always have that conversation. We do. What else do we have? Anything else on PERS before we move off on that?
Before I left home, my wife told me not to say too much. So I've been sitting here.
So you left her at home, and you've been quiet for a long time, and you didn't say OPI, Lee.
But before I became a senior, has anybody here ever heard of Oregon Project Independence? If you have, raise your hand.
Oh, I have.
Oregon what?
How many of you were ever born in Oregon? Let's see your hands. Okay, I was born in a little town in West Virginia. But when we moved to Oregon, somebody said the word Oregon Project Independence to me. And I thought, that's kind of stupid. What does that mean? Now, I wasn't a senior then. But that program has saved the state of Oregon millions of dollars since it started. Now, I have to explain it to you. It helped keep people in their own home as long as possible. Sometimes maybe you only need 2 or 3 hours of help a week. That program used to be $16 million. Now it's 9.6. I've supported every school issue since I've lived in Staten. I've walked door to door for those, but I don't see walking door to door people supporting OPI. Now, isn't that surprising? Why wouldn't they come up with money for that? And you show me another program that saved millions of dollars since it started, and I'll vote for it. But also, remember I told you my wife said don't talk. But I'm also a volunteer with a group called Senior Forums, and I'll make sure that you get one free. We're printing a history of the Oregon long-term care system. Do you have any idea when that started? Take a guess. You look like a smart fellow down there with a tie on.
him, right?
That started in
1859.
That started in
Something started then.
1975. 1975. And I want to make sure that you get a copy of it the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Is this
And there
a new
won't be
thing?
any charge for
Is this a
you.
new thing that's being printed? Because
So
you've sent me a lot
I
of
just
that
happen
stuff.
to be a volunteer treasurer of that group. And we've gotten volunteer money. No state money is tied in with that. No state money is tied in with that. I want to emphasize that. Most of us have things that we want the state to do this, the state to do that. Yeah, I want that too, but I want to be sure I pay the taxes in order to get that back. But also, when I lived in Michigan, the power plants got coal from Wyoming. Now look at visualize your federal map. Wyoming to Michigan. Coal going from Wyoming to Michigan. If you were governor of Oregon, wouldn't you call every governor between Wyoming and Michigan and ask them, how much coal what caused the problem and what happened to it? How did you fix it? This happened years ago. How did you fix the problem? If he finds out how to fix the problem, why can't we haul some coal in Oregon? And I'm not for or against it, but I just say, why can't we do those things? If all those other states, millions of tons of coal has come from Wyoming across there. And yet, if you get one coal train coming through Oregon, everybody gets up on it. And remember, my wife said, don't talk. But I'm trying to find a way to, how do we put people back to work? If the people in Oregon wanted to work, able to work, you wouldn't have a problem at the legislature. You'd have money to go to schools, you'd have money to PERS, you'd have money to every
OPI?
OPI too. And I just happen to have a picture of when I,
Oh,
and I'm prejudiced because I've always supported Sherrie Sprenger. Even when she doesn't vote for something I like, I still vote for her. But I have this sign that I made up for her. And so I can't get any newspaper to print something that there was an article in the paper sometime about halftime. And I'd love to have it. I know she has one of these. Halftime is over.
in the legislative session.
And one of the words that I say is sorry about you Democrats, because my sister-in-law is a Democrat and I still love her just the same. While the governor of Portland, is busy pushing his personal agenda, much needed programs like OPI are either being cut or funded or just a shadow what they once were. So if you have an aunt or an uncle, grandparent or so forth, ask him or her if he wants to stay in his own home as long as possible. And then you can say that program has saved the state of Oregon millions of dollars, and I can prove it. Now, that means we're not opposed to nursing homes, crucial part of the Oregon long-term care system. Foster homes, crucial part. Assisted living, a crucial part. All those are part of the long-term care system. And when we publish this, you'll see a strange name there. A young, I won't use that word, a young man out of Eugene area. Guys, Senator Wyden now helped start that program. A young whippersnapper who didn't know any better. And I can tell you a story about him that I told him face to face. When he was running for office down there, he was going around and he went out the edge of town. There was a lane going back up. Had to go through a gate to get back there. The man was sitting up there with a shotgun. He stepped out of the car, the guy raised the gun and said, blank, out of here in 5 seconds or I'm going to start shooting. So his aide got back in the car and hopped, Wyden got back in the car. And on the way out, the aide said, well, I guess you lost that vote. And Wyden said, no, put him out as undecided. I have a lot of other things, but one last thing I'm going to say though. We can't cut timber.
Right.
But thousands of timber acre burn every year. And one of the last timber mills in Oregon, Cave Junction's closed the last 2 or 3 weeks. People are out of work. They can't pay taxes.
It was the last mill in Josephine County closed. So I have to tell a story on Lee. Lee is one of my favorite people in the legislature. Not because and I'm saying in the legislature intentionally, not because he showed the cute little picture of my sign on it. He shows up on his own dime, not this session, he can't, but he shows up every single day to the legislature on his dime. And he sits in the gallery up above the House floor. And I walk, and I think about him every day because he's not there. And every day when I walk from caucus to the floor, he's sitting there, and he has his OPI button. Let me state I have an OPI button, and I've worn it on the floor too, because I get in trouble if I don't. But he is there every day advocating for what's important to him. And I've never once heard him say, put seniors before kids. I've never once heard him say that. So, and anybody that knows me knows that there's not too many people that I'll waist stand down to, but that gentleman is one of them for sure. So Tass wants to give us a number.
I do. Our PERS rate for the North San Diego School District this year, and for this particular biennium, is 19.5%. For the next biennium, it's goes up to 26.7%.
Yeah. So again, that's not to say we shouldn't have retirement. That's to say we have to have some balance in that. We have to be able to afford it. So, can I switch to Oregon School for the Deaf?
One of the big issues, I think, in Oregon is immigration. Immigration,
Okay?
this gentleman here says, how can we get unemployment up? Get all the illegals out. Close the gates down here.
So-
The illegals, you're giving driver's license. No, illegals.
I'm not.
You're giving, I don't care, the state,
Okay.
the state is giving in-state tuition to illegals, where legal people can hardly afford something like that. You get rid of the illegals, I think your unemployment, or your employment would go up, we would have less problems here. I worked for the state penitentiary in 63 to 68. We had 2 penitentiaries at that time, a minimum and a maximum. Now, as I understand it, there are 14 penitentiaries in the state of Oregon. They're overcrowded, and I think the majority of it is drugs.
So you touched on a bill that's recently passed, Senate Bill 833, recently passed out of the House, passed out, Senate came to the House, and it was to create a driver's card, not a driver's license. And back in 2008, it was my first session. It was, gosh, I think my first week or two as a legislator, and my eyes were spinning, and I was drinking water out of a fire hose. And we passed the bill, and I voted on it, that said to get an Oregon driver's license or to renew an Oregon driver's license, you needed to have proof of legal presence. That's not a utility bill. That's legal presence in the state. And I think that was a good vote. I really do, because a driver's license opens up the door for a lot of opportunities for people. What has occurred this session now is 833, Senate Bill 833, which said there's now a driver's card that's different than a driver's license. Driver's license we get for 8 years, driver's card we get for 4 years. A driver's card, you don't have to show proof of legal presence. It is designed for people that are not here legally. And the argument was, and I'm not defending it, and let me be clear, when folks say, and I hear this every so often, you people up there are 90 legislators, 30 in the Senate, 60 in the 30 in the Senate, 60 in the House. We don't all vote the same. We don't. And I did not vote for that bill because people in my district, and I happen to agree, people in my district do not want more privileges. A driver's license is not a right, it's a privilege. People in my district do not want more privileges. Not everybody, but the majority. So I voted no on that bill, and it will pass. Governor obviously, did pass, Governor already signed it, and people can get that license. The reason that was promoted, or the reason that was used to promote that idea, was so now people could get insurance. So, and not drive uninsured.
Why don't they become legal first, then we'll do it?
That would be a piece, for sure. Now, the only thing I'll push back on a little bit is we have some borders, but they're not Oregon borders. That's why this is a federal issue. We can't close our Oregon borders. And so, what we can do, and this bill was passed in New Mexico. It didn't work so well for them. And they believed that it just brought an influx of people with illegal status to the state. And there is concern that that could happen in Oregon. We will see, because now it's our law.
It's already here.
Well, more is the concern. So I'm not saying I pleased you with my answer, but did I answer your question?
In a sense, but why can't we copy the state of Arizona?
Because we have a different political makeup than the state of Arizona.
Yeah, but that's why I asked at the beginning, does our state officials know the difference between legal and illegal? Millions of people have come in through, I guess, Ellis Island. One of the things, they had to learn to speak English.
Right.
They had to learn to write. Now, hey, we got to hire extra tutors, extra teachers to teach the illegals how to speak. And that's one of our situations is why our education cost is going up.
So did you attend Ron Wyden's, Senator Wyden's town hall that was here a few months ago?
Never saw it advertised.
That is, I wasn't there either. That's where you need to go with that federal issue. I hear you and I get it. I don't win all the state battles that I try to win. I don't. And I don't have a whole lot leeway to win the federal battles. So, Oregon School for the Deaf. You wanted to go there. So, you want me to talk about the school, or I think you probably have someplace you want to go with the conversation, so tell me where you want to go.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I'll go there.
I want to do a little historical perspective.
Okay.
Because I think what happens is people look at what they see now without realizing where it's been before. First of all, so you understand, I have been a registered Republican for 45 years. My grandfather, who
Longer
died,
than me.
yeah, my grandfather, who died on the 9th month of his 100th birthday, is the one that made me a Republican. And he still had Alf Landon buttons in his house, okay? You have to be really old even to remember that. So, I come from a very small farming community in eastern Washington, somewhat similar to Staten, but I have lived here since 1990, okay? And I got involved with the School for the Deaf because I knew one of the former superintendents. And he asked my business to be involved to assist with some equipment that was required, because the state did not have the necessary funds, and I'm one of those, if I can pitch in, as Tass knows. I was on the political action committee with her. So I'm not afraid to write the check, okay? If it's a good cause, I'll write the check, okay? School, as you know very well, is 140 years old. The prior Oregon Department of Education, not the current one, but the prior one, under the former director, Susan Castillo, had an agenda, which I found out just by secondhand because of my involvement, and I did some other stuff. And the agenda was to close both the blind and the deaf school. And she and her assistant worked very hard and very diligently at accomplishing. They accomplished half of it with the blind school. I'm not arguing on behalf of the blind school. It's just that I found, like, if somebody's going to do something, I say, okay, if we do this, what is our alternative? Because I always think you should have an alternative. If you're going to close down a court, then, you know, how are we going to, you know, try the cases? You know, what's our alternative in the situation? Well, there wasn't, other than to say, we're going to mainstream the kids. To me, what that became, because I'd taken time to learn about it and helped my friend with issues at the school.
For the deaf.
Yes, for the School for the Deaf, not the blind school, the deaf school. And basically, what it came down to is I found out it was warehousing the kids. The kids maybe would have an aid, but they wouldn't be really integrated into the system. And in case of, like, with Tass here at the school board, who is just fighting every day to balance the budget, she doesn't really have the extra special education funds to hire the proper staff that the School for the Deaf is serving at this point, okay? And there are lots of other school districts throughout the state, okay? So my point in all of this is, I said, is there ways that we can help the school fund their own activities, to make them not self-sufficient, but go a long ways down the road. Other deaf schools have done this, other schools have done this throughout, okay? And programs began, there's a program, I don't know if you're familiar with Helping Hands, okay? And also, as you know, the Fright Factory, the haunted house, has been a phenomenal success. Huge success, okay? All student-run and student-directed, with little or no support, both financially or, how do I say, encouragement from other levels. In other words, this is totally self-driven, okay? So, my concern is, when they talk, and this has been brought up ever since Susan Castillo came up with her master plan of closing the school, I'm saying, my concern is just the kids. That's all I care about. How do we properly provide for these kids to have not only education, but also because of, and please don't be offended anyone when I say this, they have a challenges because they're deaf. And then there are also many students there too that have other disabilities on top of the
Yeah,
deafness,
they do.
okay? I'm one of these fiscal conservatives that says, I don't want the state to have to support these people for the rest of their lives. I want them to be, at the best of their ability, contributing members to society, because that becomes a win-win situation for all of us. Makes them better people, makes the state a better situation. So when I hear the potential closing of the school, I would like to know your stand on that, and also, what are the realistic alternatives to provide a proper education for these young men and women? That's it.
I got an answer for you. So here's some facts on the Oregon School for the Deaf. The campus is 52 acres, north part of Salem. It has 19 buildings, some of them very, very old, some of them original, 19 buildings. They have 107 students. That could have come up to 113 last week. Last number I saw though was 107. They have 83 staff members. 11 of those are maintenance people, all of which that have been there right at 20 years or more. And they also have a lot of maintenance and facility issues. For instance, they have 24-hour people on duty for the boiler. I think the average cost is $75,000 per student, which is comparable to a student who's mainstreamed in Oregon. There's approximately 600 deaf students in the state, deaf student or hearing impaired students in the state of Oregon being educated in their home districts.
7,500.
No. 600. 600 deaf or hearing impaired students
Yes.
in the state.
I was talking about the cost per student. You said
73 to 75,000. No, I said 1,000. I meant to say 1,000.
okay.
I meant to say 1,000. And that's very comparable to what it costs to mainstream these students in their home districts. So those are some facts. Not my facts, those are just facts. I've been out to the school recently, and there is some conversation about what do we do with the school, what is appropriate. 107, even 113 students, 83 staff. That should cause us to say what's going on. I have a very deep concern about the school for the school for the deaf, and I'll tell you what it is. They had approximately 2 students pass their OAKS test. They have a lot of academic issues. Now, I've learned a lot. These aren't facts, this is what I've learned. These are my opinions. I think most of us know, or a lot of us know, and you brought up School for the Blind, so that's a great comparison. Being visually impaired or blind is, don't laugh at me, is a very different disability than deafness. Reason being is language acquisition. You have all the abilities to acquire language if you're blind. You do not if you're deaf. I talked to a student who didn't acquire language skills till she was 8 years old. Think about that. You know your granddaughter. 8 years old. Many of the students at the School for the Deaf, 80 to 90% of them was the percentage that was given to me, do not speak American Sign Language with their family at home. How are they communicating with their families? There is a huge emphasis, I've been out there, on the facilities and on the grounds. Beautiful grounds, I think that's great. So I had a conversation with Rob Saxton, who's the Deputy Superintendent of Education for the state. And he has started looking into the school and what's going on. And I told him, and I told the director of the school in a committee meeting 2 weeks ago, I said, I understand that deafness is different in that it's a culture and that it's a communication issue. I cannot fathom not being able to communicate with my family. I cannot fathom not being able to communicate with my 15-year-old son. Either way, I cannot. So we have a different issue than we had blindness at the school before. That said, I understand that element, and I want to see that element preserved. I am not willing to sacrifice students achieving to do that, and they can achieve. I met a young lady up there, it was Friday I was up there. Met a young lady up there too. Super bright girls. They just couldn't hear. Super bright. I mean, they're just phenomenal. They just glowed. They were just awesome girls. It's like, I want to go have coffee with you because I think you'd be fun to hang out with. And neither one has a traditional standard high school diploma. Neither one does. They're both going to Shemeketa trying to build their skills so they can pass their Oaks test, which is a whole nother Pandora's box that we don't have time for tonight. Trying to get that up so they can get their standard diploma. Those girls need to be in college. They need to be in college. What is occurring oftentimes at the School for the Deaf is you have a student that's struggling in their home district, just not getting there. I mean, they're not using language skills at home. They're struggling, and they come here, so there's a lot of catch-up. So I'll tell you very clearly what my goals are and the message I have sent to the Department of Education. I'm just one state representative. I know I'm not the only one that feels this way, but I'll own my belief. I do not want to see the school closed. I don't believe the school needs 52 acres and 19 buildings. I do not believe any school needs that unless they have a huge student body, not 107 students. And there is not a covenant on that property that says it can't be sold, because that's been looked into. That's just way too many buildings. The Extreme Makeover dorm that was done isn't used. It isn't used. Just because of the construct of it, that just doesn't make sense. So what I would like to see done, and this is the message I sent, is I don't want to see the school closed. I do think they need to pare down their property. They need to pare down their facilities. The buildings, 19, is, I think, ridiculous. And they need the $1.5 million to replace the boiler, because you cannot justify 11 maintenance staff for 107 students. And they need to get their test scores up. They've got to figure out a way to get a more robust curriculum in place. Oregon School for the Blind, the students there could not even receive a diploma. It was not accredited.
But see, part of the issue, and I've discovered this, okay, I'm old enough to know that a lot of people, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the system, have agendas, okay?
You bet.
And so when they have agendas, they figure there's a way to put a stranglehold. Let's not provide the necessary tools like you're talking about,
okay,
to allow something to succeed. Let's allow it to fail on its own weight. The classic example is what you're talking about.
Classic example is the Oregon School for the Blind.
Well, yes,
That's
and that was, and there was a lawsuit involved, and I won't get involved in all of that. But, and of course, this is where government mindset at times really bothers me, because what happens is that rather than saying, okay, we have a problem, let's fix it, like in Pennsylvania School for the Deaf, the state said, we have to have state-of-the-art facilities.
Do they have the Helen Keller School there? Is that in Pennsylvania or Virginia?
I don't believe,
Sorry.
I don't believe that is there, but the point is, they said we have all of these state-of-the-art, you know, the computers and all of the things that deaf students can use, so we can consolidate, make a, not necessarily beautiful, but a contemporary facility that provides education and allows things like you're talking about, test scores and all of these things to happen, because they have a department that says, let's support this program, let's support the ideas you're talking about, rather than making it a 52-acre piece of property that stores all the old blind vehicles. And, you know, I mean, it becomes basically a storage yard. So what happens in all of this is that it has to be, and I think the Extreme Makeover was a classic example. I'm sorry, I do not remember the gentleman's name who owns the construction company that was involved. He built all the McDonald's and stuff around here. But he and some other people in the private sector have tried to do exactly what I'm talking about. Let's take the what the Extreme Makeover started and make it, expand it to make it consolidated but state-of-the-art, and where the private sector works with the public sector
Which is great.
to make this whole thing work. There was, in the past, I'm talking about the past, I'm not trying to be critical of the Department of Education now, but in the past, not only resistance, there was literally minimal cooperation. And there was roadblock after roadblock. And in fact, I testified before the committee the last time. I don't know if you were on at that time, but Fred Gerard was, and he asked me to come and, basically saying, we have got an opportunity here to not only sustain the second oldest institution in the history of the state of Oregon, but also make it a shining example of something that represents not only the deaf culture, but the pride of Oregon of making sure that we take care of the kids. That's, most of my life is behind me, so I'm concerned about the kids for the future.
So last thing,
Okay.
as we wrap up that piece there, I do have an agenda too. I absolutely do. And that is all of the students in this state, including the deaf ones, have a robust opportunity at an education. And some of the things that I've seen concern me. Some kids maybe don't have the same capacity as those two rock star girls did, for sure, and that's okay. But we need to be offering more and a more robust opportunity for them. And I believe that there has been a huge shift in the Oregon Department of Education, and I'm glad there's a huge shift in that department. I called them the school police for years. Were they the school police?
That's exactly right.
They were the school police. And they're not the school police anymore. And they're shifting gears, and I had that face-to-face conversation with Rob Saxton saying, I do not want to sacrifice the culture and the opportunity for communication and language building that really occurs there differently than it does anywhere else. I don't want to lose that. But I won't pay the price tag of 107 students that aren't given the same opportunity as the rest of the kids.
Who's going to come up with the plan, though?
The plan. Well, there's a couple pieces to the plan. No, there's a couple pieces. Then I am going to move off that because it's 8 o'clock. There's a couple pieces. Number one is one of the roofs is bad. What do school board members talk about more than about anything? Roofs. At least when I was a school board.
Why
Well,
don't we
not
use
yours,
some
no.
of the, why don't we use some of the money that is
From the
in
School for the
trust
Blind?
for the School for the Blind? on
Some
the
of that
deferred
money
maintenance?
can be used and has been used.
But there's still a huge, huge amount of it that's
Okay.
just sitting there, that could be
So,
used for that sort of
I
thing.
think probably what needs to occur is, I've got business cards back there. Two of you should take business cards. We should sit down and spend some time talking about
Okay,
this.
cool.
Truly, really. So, one last thing, and I'm not going to jet out, but I'm going to wrap this up.
Was Castilla was she even an educator? I don't think she was even a teacher.
She was a journalist. She was elected by the people. She was elected by the people and not required to be an educator. So, as I said, I'm not going to jet out of the room, but I am going to wrap it up because for those of you that want to take off, I want you to feel that freedom to take off, that you're not jetting out early, but I certainly appreciate the fact that you give up an hour of your time in that weather to be here. There's business cards on the back. Feel free to take them. If you want to have a more lengthy conversation on a particular topic, take it and give me a call and we'll talk about it. There is a lot going on at the school right now. There's a lot of conversation going on about the school right now. But feel free to take those and we'll chat about what you want to chat about. So, and take some cookies, for sure, because I'm not going to eat them. So,
I'd like to make one final comment, though.
oh Lee, I'm getting nervous.
And remember, if you ever talked to my wife, remember I said that. But you know, I've advocated at the Capitol for almost 29 years. I spent my own money. I never took any money from anybody else. So if I walked in with a senator or representative office, I was spending my own time, my own gas, my own food. And so anybody else say that? No. And I'm not opposed to that. If you want to spend money, more power to you. But I thought I could always go in there with an honest face and say, this is a program, or that's a program, or this is a program that saved the state of Oregon money. Why wouldn't you be interested in something like that? And I think, I've been in a couple representatives and senators' office the first day they ever were there. They didn't even know stuff was in their office.
Now, does Peter Courtney run away from you, or does
they
he,
didn't even know
does he
stuff
embrace
was in
you?
their office.
There's a whole
And
nother story.
one of the fellows, and I'm not going to mention his name, I said, well, I'm supposed to get a phone the next day. I said, well, sir, it's in that drawer in your desk then. I said, how did you know that? I said, well, I talked to the fellow who was here before you came. So,
Well, I commend you for your 29-year commitment, and I'm going to give him a round of applause. That's even more than you, Jazz.
And any of you that do not receive my electronic newsletter and want to, you can sign up for it back there. We send it out every 2 weeks during session, once a month when we're not in session. And if you look at it, you don't like it, you unsubscribe, and that's fine. I sure don't do anything with the mailing list, for sure. So thank you to everybody, and appreciate you coming out. And like I said, I'm